Good afternoon or good day, depending on which part of the world or time zone you are. Welcome to the third in the series of seminars, now webinar to celebrate Nigeria's National Day anniversary, the 61st this year. I am Fola Shoboyejo, Executive Director of the Shoboyejo Turning Point Charity Foundation. In collaboration with the Association of Nigerians in Lethbridge and the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association, you are welcome to this seminar. For some, there may not be information or awareness of the activities of the Shoboyejo Foundation. Our mission is simple: to promote and work on educational development and community development. To this end, with the grace of God and the support of people from especially Lethbridge churches and in different parts of the world, we have support. Even in Nigeria, we have completed the reconstruction of a school, the Ogun School in Ifo local government of Ogun State, Nigeria. 3 classrooms, a computer laboratory, toilet building, all with ceramic flooring and aluminum roofing. We have also done 2 seminars in the past. One on immigration and global migration from history to now and going to the future. We also held a seminar in 2019 on the topic of development and democracy. Borrowed from the developed countries, will the model work in developing countries? So this is the third one. We didn't have one last year due to COVID, and we hope you will enjoy it. And for the future, our project is a women and youth center to promote after-school activities instead of kids running into trouble, running around the village and having conflicts with their parents. We are dreaming of a youth and women center where women too can acquire skills in literacy, crafts, and work with the kids on painting, drawing, sculpting, weaving, braiding, fashion designing, haircuts, crafts and welding, small crafts items, and woodwork. And because of the connection of Ogun town to the Adubi War in the 20s, about a century ago, whereby when the war theater was very hot and the conflict was very devastating, the people that escaped from that conflict found refuge in Ogun town. And from our knowledge, based on our knowledge and available information to us, Adubi, the freedom fighter who led the struggle, is remembered in books and stories about the war, Adubi War, but he has not been memorialized. There's no cenotaph to his memory and things like that. So we have space in the lot after developing the Women and Youth Center to have Adubi Heroes Museum built in the place. We also have plans for internet radio where children can express themselves and people can interact on the internet, radio, and learn and teach, and do have all kind of information, local and so forth, about commodities, market days, and local sports and things like that. That is our dream for the future. And even now, before we formally launch the project, we have, contributions already coming in. So this is an opportunity for partnership and for support. Thank you and welcome to the third in the series of our webinars and seminars. And the title is Fake News, Disinformation, Belief Systems, and Truth. Perspectives on navigating a polarized world for peace, development, and happiness. We will have fun today because we are very great speakers. Thank you and welcome.
So my next speaker is James Moore. At the age of 17, James Moore left his hometown in the Boreal Forest and completed an undergraduate degree in psychology and philosophy. Recognizing a deficiency in the Occidental worldview, he embarked on a larger exploration of cultures, music, and languages, traveling extensively in Europe, Central Asia, and Turtle Island. He has been a contributing writer to the Manitoba Kiwatoni Okinawanak. After moving to Lethbridge with his spouse Arlene and their two sons, James completed a Master of Education degree and became an instructor in the School of Justice Studies at the Lethbridge College, and he is a registered Canadian immigration consultant. Please join me in welcoming James Moore. Thank you.
Lahia, Pawoni, Kadu, Barisako, Sanatapi. The last one was Nitsitapi. We were in Nitsitapi territory. I want to say a couple things that connect Indigenous peoples in Canada to Africa. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't. But before I go there, there's two things that I want to begin with. Is it good? Okay. Esther, could you give me a 5 and then a 1? The first one is David Graeber. He's a person I read a lot. And when I discover someone who keeps appearing as a reference, I find I want to read him in the original. And I just have a rather profound, I think, and brilliant small quotation from David Graeber, who unfortunately died about 1 year ago at the very young age of 59. And it's the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make and could just as easily make different. If you think about ourselves, our species, that we've been arrogant enough to name Homo sapiens, which means the wise ones, and where we are today and what we're doing now. I don't think we want to think necessarily that fake news or false narratives, which is sort of an expansion of the soundbite of a fake news, is something new. It's not new at all. It's been going on, and since I've only got 20 minutes, I'm just going to speak about the last 500 years of it. But the second thing I want to say at the beginning is, like Esther said, I'm from originally northern Canada, a small mining town that was stuck into the forest because it was at that time called the richest mine on earth. And so the Nihilwak people were there long before the mine showed up. And when you're growing up, like, there's a commonality everyone in this room and everyone listening online has. That is, I know for certain that we were all babies once. And that means that each of us, as members of this Homo sapiens, came into this world with nothing to survive on except love and trust. We had no other resource. And because that's so, I think, you know, it's gives us hope and, you know, a really positive opportunity to look at positive possibilities, because if we come with only that to survive, and we think about what we could just as easily make differently. Yeah? Okay, sorry. I was not speaking into it. So given that, and so I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm thinking, I'm 11 years old. And we noticed, myself and my childhood friends, that the Nihilwak people, when they said things, they were always saying, I guess. And we joked among ourselves in our ignorance. We said, Indians don't know anything. They're only guessing. They're always guessing. Now, if we are capable of learning, I think we can recognize that, you know, an earlier state of cognition can be transcended. As we learn more, we sort of fill in the blanks. Now, I think this is really profound again, because what you're saying is that I recognize the limits of my own being, my tiny view of the world, that there's far more than I can comprehend. So I am guessing. In you know, another way, when we look at science, and some of the previous speakers, especially Titi Omoetu was speaking and trying to say that we make a hypothesis and then we check it. And the best way to do that is by, you know, when you use the word peer review, you're talking about essentially the ability to reproduce the phenomenon, the experiment, to see that the results of the hypothesis are as you said. So it's like a collective guess. And in this way, we sort of move forward as a species, as a people, but it all involves sharing. And so one of the great problems and the greatest of the false narratives, what I was taught growing up, because you know, I can remember in grade 1, I went to school and they unrolled a world map. And on that world map, everything that was red was part of the British Empire. I can remember seeing Nigeria there on that map. A lot of it was red. This is 4 years before independence, of course. Now, how they presented that to my 6-year-old brain, like now, again, I consider it to be a false narrative, a skewed narrative, and a narrative that served to justify the exploitation and to benefit people who were benefiting from that exploitation. This is, you know, basically an example of the history of the last 500 years. And we have to recognize that this includes, as Frantz Fanon, another African, was so brilliant in pointing out, not only him, but he certainly was a seminal thinker in that regard, about the colonization of the mind. And this makes it more difficult because the mind is something that, like, when you're thinking, you have to work through how it was the colonization happened. And I think if we're looking now in the first couple of decades of the 21st century, wouldn't we be speaking somewhat to the colonization of the mind in terms of the fake news phenomenon, for example, around climate change or around right now very profoundly COVID? It seems so to me. And it seems so for similar examples. Yes, who is profiting from this? When you design an algorithm that maximizes advertising revenue, that feeds to the person who is on social media more and more of what they're watching, and you have the algorithm feeding it because the more attentive, the more time they spend, the more advertising they look at, and the more your revenue increases. It doesn't really matter if that's your intention to deceive, which the last speaker mentioned. I mean, it might not be your immediate and deliberate intention. It might be an indirect phenomenon, but certainly you are profiting from it. And that algorithm is functioning in that fashion to maximize your profit. This goes back to the very root of the problem, perhaps, which is when we created corporations and then decided that they were persons legally under the law. And these are persons whose legal obligation is to maximize profit, and that's what they're doing. And the consequences, as Titi Omo Etu said, you know, you can cause a lot of harm for your profit. But because you are a corporation, you externalize those costs, you externalize that harm, and you maximize your profit thereby. So that's part of what's happening. But I wanted to speak about the three revolutions of the 18th century briefly. Probably, you know, at least two of them, perhaps three, because there's more Africans here who are more aware of the third. Not many people, generally speaking, have heard of the third. So the first would be the American Revolution, 1776. Second, the French Revolution, 1789, rough years. And the third is the Haitian Revolution, Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines. And this is actually the most profound of the three, I think, because in the first, and I'm still on the theme of a false narrative, which they started teaching me when I was small. And the false narrative of we the people, for example, in the American Revolution, which it seems so proud of, well, that wasn't Africans who'd been enslaved. That wasn't indigenous people whose land was being stolen. That wasn't women. That wasn't Asian people. It wasn't even most of the men who didn't own property. So this is a very narrow, very elite group who were profiting, but they'd like to imagine that we the people spoke to more than them. And I think this is one of the things I've noticed in my exploration of what I sometimes call a deficiency of European thought, that there's a limited ability to understand and to appreciate the complexity of the world and of Homo sapiens in the world if you don't realize that we are all included. And it's very difficult for a colonizing nation to recognize themselves in the colonized. You know, Fanon is brilliant on this, but anyway, you need somebody to like Toussaint Louverture to describe that. And here's a quotation from him. The brilliant Black leader who, under his and Dessalines' generalship, first defeated the English, then the Spanish, and then Napoleon, who sent an army of 60,000 under his brother to reconquest the island with the mission to kill every Black slave, everyone, just the males. That was their mission, because they thought they could get more from Africa. And they had to destroy, and of course they were supported by the Americans, because the very idea that this could be a successful revolution imperiled the world order at that time. But this is what Toussaint, this is a beautiful quote from Toussaint. He said, "Under the blows of your barbarous whip, we have accumulated for you the treasures you enjoy in this colony. The human race has suffered to see with what barbarity you have treated men like yourself." And that's the key point. You know, as we warp into this globalization story, what it does is alienates people, it atomizes people, it drives them into this individualism where they can't connect socially. And that means they're starving for that social connection that we humans need. And that means there's a power to this conspiracy, whatever stupidity it is, because at least you're associating with other people. And this is really a dangerous phenomenon, but we don't have to go that road. Like Graeber observed, we could just as easily make something different. And of course we should. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.